So one of the many important models that we can look at as well is the strategy canvas. The strategy canvas offers several advantages to innovators in the way they want to look at the world, as opposed to some of the more staid models such as the Maslow multidimensional matrix. The advantage of that is it enables you to actually, like most topics of visualization, it enables you to actually see what is going on around you. You can see where your strategies converge, the way they fit together, the way they work together, and they can help you understand how you can differentiate yourself from others in the same that are operating the same area. You can see actually if they are following the same orthodoxy, if you're all trying to operate in the same model areas, you can look at strategic canvas and say, where are the gaps on this? Where are the white spaces? Where are the things in where we can differentiate, we can operate it? So it gives you some idea of what you are already doing different to those who are operating your same environment, and what it is that you are doing the same, what you're doing similar, and how you might be able to make the disadvantages. It also gives you opportunity to look at relative advantages as opposed to absolute advantages. So you can see you may actually be better at everything, but there may be areas in which your gap is so much bigger that it is much easier to take advantage of those gaps. And it literally allows you to see white space on the paper where you can see there may well be opportunities for you to do something different, for you to innovate, and for you to be actually competitive in the way of differentiation. I have an example here of a public strategy transformation canvas done by Donald Reed for the Homeland Security in the US back in 2006. And in it, he was looking at the competitive conflict resolution, looking at the idea of the war on terror and the Vietnam War, and he's looking at how things had changed. And he basically broke down the areas of competition into two big areas: the industrial age, historically places where people compete in land, in the air, maritime, space, and the information age, whether it's physical information, cognitive, and social competition, such as social media, etc., and cyber competition, which stood on the edges. And he looked at how, over this period of time, had great powers such as the USA, the Soviet Union, China, etc., competed with those lesser powers, such as maybe Vietnam or the Middle East, etc., Syria, Egypt, Israel, that sort of thing. And he said there was obviously clearly always an advantage in the classic military areas in which they competed. So there's a clear advantage among land competition, clear advantage in air competition, a clear advantage in maritime competition. But then there would be in space and cyber areas, in fact, there was an even bigger advantage. These new, modern, expensive things that required a certain level of technology, etc., it was even more difficult. So these areas in which it was very much possible to push the lesser powers completely aside with less effort because of the great level of competition that existed there. However, they then looked at the new age, the information age, and looked at the areas there how competition went on, and so that actually physically in the information age there was again a closing up of the gap between the greater and lesser ages. Information, the lesser powers maintained their level of information, but actually the sheer data processing capability, the giant computers of the great powers, they could actually build up a further advantage. In cognitive, it was difficult, perhaps, that both groups tended to fall back more to the traditional gap. And the social areas, there was a little bit of advantage to the big areas. They were able to make a lot of effort in, for instance, funding of good publicity, influencing newspaper coverage, etc. But there's still a bigger gap. And so you saw a kind of traditional strategic transformation canvas tree in which the great powers could be seen to have an advantage across the board. They have an absolute advantage, but their comparative advantage was even greater in the newer fields of space and cyber, and in areas such as information, a little bit in social, than it was in some of the more traditional areas, the physical, the maritime, the air, the land, etc. So these were areas in which it should have been even easier for the great powers to brush them aside. But of course, this modern war on terror, it started to realize that they started to suffer defeats and casualties against other players in a strange sort of strategy. So they saw other powers came along that actually were very close to them in cyber. They didn't have the great technology, they didn't have access to all the equipment, but they had access to enough of it to make a difference. And so physical bases and cyber bases, they were not far behind the great powers. And in some ways, in the information age, we noticed that these new competitors, these new players, were starting to match the great powers for information, was slightly perhaps ahead of it in cognition because they were more adaptable, they were smaller, they were more nimble, they were actually quicker in the environment than perhaps some of the others, suggesting to me that maybe they had less of a plan and more of an environmental adaptation that they had. So maybe to them it was more, their strategies were more one of building up a culture, of building up a kind of network of organizations working together that followed the same values but didn't necessarily directly follow orders or plans. And this gave them a great advantage in the social scale. And so if we had a new player that took up this sort of position on the transformation canvas and was a great threat to the great powers. And of course, this is an example of Al Qaeda and other non-state actors entering into the battle zone and inflicting certain defeats on the great powers because they're able to move about. And it's not just the US we talk about a lot. In fact, much greater damage has been done to Russia and then to a lesser extent China by Al Qaeda than has happened in many ways to the US doing that. So it's important to recognise that there we get the publicity of what Al Qaeda was doing in the West, but actually these sorts of other non-state acts have done a lot of damage to the successor states of the Soviet Union as well, and in other areas, and has also struggled against some of the older, lesser powers, causing issues for instance, the governments of Libya and Syria, etc., among others. So we can see this new player. This new player had a strategic canvas in which he spotted a space and the game was able to get into it. I think it's important for you to recognise that, as I've said all along, that visualization is a really important key element. And so I'd really urge you to look at some other visualization techniques that will enable you to present your strategy better. And the examples of this hard and soft methodologies, rich pictures, flow control diagrams. I use these as just a few examples. And on the VLE, I have put in videos not done by myself but done by other people which I believe introduce these approaches and will help you in learning great understanding them. So if you go away from here and wish to make greater use of strategy elsewhere, and you wish to make, as I've said all along, the importance of being able to convince people in the arguments of strategy, then you have these here that you can work with. So therefore I do urge you to get involved in them and use them, watch these videos, and in your final report perhaps you can reflect on how these might have been useful for you as you went through the course. A few references for you there.